part man, part machine. Underneath, it's a hyper-alloy combat chassis, microprocessor-controlled, fully armored, very tough. But outside, it's living human tissue, flesh, skin, hair, blood, grown for the cyborgs. This is the No Fear podcast. We know what scares you. Hi, I'm Matt.
And I'm Lisa. And this is the No Fear Cast, the podcast where we dissect horror and all the things that scare us. This past season, we discussed robots in length. We thought we'd use our second summer of sci-fi to go more in depth with the first two Terminator movies, or as I like to call them, Terminator 1, Bad Robot. Terminator 2, Good Robot. All right, Matt, I'm really glad you suggested these movies because this was fun to revisit. And I'll just go ahead and say right away that Mel is not joining us for this episode, and we're going to miss her. So I'm going to go ahead and say, hi, Mel. We miss you. Come back soon. But Matt, what was it about the Terminator movies that you thought needed, I guess, a deeper look?
Well, I kind of threw it out when we were just discussing ideas for this next main episode. And, you know, I've always loved the Terminator movies, and I think that's the big part right there, is I've just always liked them. But I'd say more importantly, like you said in the introduction, we did a series this season on robots and androids and all of that, and I think the Terminator series fits pretty squarely in that. But also, we were discussing what to do for this next Summer of Sci-Fi episode as we were recording our mini episode that was based around the Jaws, where we sort of discussed blockbuster movies and in general, and whether or not Jaws was a blockbuster, the first blockbuster, I should say. And I mean, Terminator 2 just sort of jumped into my mind immediately. Like, robots, we've talked about, huge summer blockbuster. It's a great sort of next jump, I guess. Plus, I mean, what's not to love about the Terminator movies, right?
Right. Well, yeah, it does fit with what we've been talking about. And since our last, and you alluded to our mini episode. And so for those of you who don't know, those are episodes that come out in between the weeks of our main episodes for our Patreon supporters. So if that's something you think you'd be interested in, you could head over to our Patreon page. And our last one we did for them was on the summer blockbuster, specifically on Jaws as kind of the first summer blockbuster. And Terminator, you're right, Matt, fits this perfectly because I think it was made for just over $6 million, and the box office on that was over $78 million. So it was a massive success. Terminator 2 even more so. So much, so big of a hit, and it continued on to be a classic that it actually was re-released in 3D some 26 years later. So that just kind of shows you the enduring quality of these movies. I will also say, just to go ahead and throw that out there before we get too deep into the discussion, we're only talking about the first two Terminator movies because I think, Matt, you and I agree that we're just going to forget that the rest of them happened.
I think that's probably for the best. Well, I have a special place in my heart for Terminator 3 because I like what they did with it in the last, 15 minutes. But everything leading up to those last 15 minutes just feels like a rehash of Terminator 2, only plot twist, the evil Terminator is a woman this time. And that's really the only difference. And John Connor's grown up instead of a kid. So, and everything else after that, I mean, I've seen them, but I wish I hadn't. So yeah, we're gonna stick with the two big ones, the first two Terminators, because, I mean, yeah, we don't have time to sit and complain about how bad the other ones got.
No, and we won't do that because that would not be fun. But
no, it wouldn't.
There's also a good reason because they are doing a Terminator reboot. James Cameron is bringing out a new Terminator, which I'm kind of excited about because the casting that I've been hearing about is really exciting. I think Mackenzie Davis is going to be one of the stars in it, and I love her. And anyway, but I think from what I've been reading on that is supposed to only take into account Terminator and Terminator 2. So I think, like the rest of us, the reboot is only focusing on the first two and kind of forgetting the other ones. If I was reading that right. But anyway.
Well, here's my question about the reboot before we dive into these. Is this going to happen after his, like, next Avatar sequels that he... Because aren't there 4 more or something that he's working on right now? Or I don't remember. I think it's a total of 4 maybe. But anyway, if James Cameron is actually helming this Terminator reboot, it may be a little while, because I know he's got his hands full with Dances with Aliens. So
I can't remember now the date off the top of my head that said it was going to come out, but I feel like it's going to come out before Avatars.
Well, that would be good. That would be good. But
I hope so anyway. Maybe just because I'm hearing casting information. I don't know. Anyway. But yeah, so let's talk the original Terminator first, because I have a feeling we're going to have a lot to say about the second one. So let's talk the first Terminator, which of course came out in 1984, director James Cameron, just like we've been discussing, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger and Linda Hamilton. And I guess for those of you who don't know, although I don't know why you're listening to this episode if you're not fans of this like we are, the basic plot is that a Terminator, which is this like cyborg killing machine that looks human, comes back from 2029, I think. And there's been some sort of nuclear holocaust or big horrible war, and he's trying to kill Sarah Connor because her son is going to lead the resistance against basically the AI, the robot army. And if I'm just boiling it down to its basics, that's the plot of Terminator. And then there's people who come and try to save her and help her. And you have Arnold Schwarzenegger as the big bad Terminator. So he's the killing machine, I guess, in the Terminator. And I will just go ahead and say, because we spent 3 or 4 episodes talking about how scary robots are, and one thing that I had forgotten about the Terminator until we kind of revisited it for this episode is, to me, the scariest thing about these Terminators, not just that they're just out solely to kill people, but that they can mimic voices. I don't know why that scares me so badly, but it does. Yeah.
Oh, I 100% agree, and I know I'm jumping into Terminator 2 as well, but like there's a moment where the evil Terminator in Terminator 2 does that as well, where he's like mimicking the voice of a kid, and so you see this adult making this, Edward Furlong's voice basically, and it's just unsettling, like to see that happen, or to see Arnold Schwarzenegger moving his mouth, but it's not his voice coming out. It's just one of those things that's like, I guess it fits kind of into that uncanny valley a little bit that we talked about, because it's hard to portray that when you've got Arnold Schwarzenegger, the actual human, but we can so easily show that he's a robot by having him use someone else's voice, like, flawlessly. So yeah, it's weird.
It is, and it is uncanny, and it is the uncanny valley, as we've talked about in previous episodes, but it's like multiple layers of that, because it's wrong to see a grown man speak as a young boy, or as he does at one point, I think he mimics her mother, maybe, but having a woman's voice come out of his mouth, that sounds strange to us, and it clicks that button in your brain that says something's wrong here and puts us on alert immediately. But then, Terminator and Terminator 2 that kind of fits in one of those endlessly quotable movies. And people, catchphrases from these films have become part of just everyday language, even for people who may not even know where the catchphrases come from. And we all know Arnold Schwarzenegger's voice. Like, you're probably hearing them in your head as I'm talking about it right now. And so to hear any other voice come out of him other than the Arnold Schwarzenegger voice that we know and love, that's uncanny too. So it hits us on several different levels. But yeah, I forgot how creepy that was.
Oh, absolutely. And I was thinking about this as I was getting ready to record this episode with you, and thinking about, what is it about Terminator? Because, I mean, the Terminator movies aren't so much horror. They're sci-fi action movies, but there is that horror element to them. And I was thinking that one thing that really unsettles me is, I think, the same thing that unsettles me about zombie movies, which is how relentless the Terminator is. He doesn't need to sleep. He doesn't need to eat. All he wants to do is kill. And so, he's like Jason. He's going to walk slowly and kill you because he never has to stop, right? Like, that's just, like,
Yeah.
trying to get away from that. I mean, especially in the first one, where you've got Kyle Reese, the human who was sent back by John Connor to protect his mother before he's been born. Again, time travel movies, there's all sorts of these paradoxes that make your head hurt. But, Kyle and Sarah, they have to stop. They have to eat. They have to rest. They get physically worn out, whereas Terminator just keeps on going. He doesn't care. He has one mission, and he won't stop till it's over, and he doesn't have to stop. I think that's where a lot of the tension really comes from, aside from the fact that he's from the future and on a mission to kill.
I couldn't agree more with you. And I love that comparison to, like, a Jason Voorhees character, because when you think about it, you said earlier, you're like, this is a science fiction film with horror elements, and I'm almost thinking it's flip-flop. Like, this is a horror film with science fiction elements to it. Because, yeah, in the first Terminator, he's the boogeyman. He's this unkillable, unstoppable thing that is not human and doesn't need, as you said, to sleep or rest or eat or, anything. He doesn't need to recover from his wounds. You can strip the skin off the thing and he's still going to come after you. And I mean, that right there, that's the plot of nearly all the 80s horror movies. All you need to do is swap her for, like, a teenage girl running through the woods, and that's essentially what you have, right?
Pretty much. Oh, and I would also add too that he can't be reasoned with. Like, he is programmed to do this one thing: kill Sarah Connor. And so, if he were to catch Sarah Connor and she's, please don't kill me, he doesn't care. I mean, there is no reasoning with the Terminator. He's relentless and he doesn't have emotions because he's a robot. Cyborg, excuse me. So, but it's the same thing with Jason Voorhees or Michael Myers or Freddy Krueger, and I'd say Michael Myers even would be a really good analog here, because Michael Myers is a human, but he's this remorseless serial killer. Essentially, he's a psychopath, and so you can't reason with Michael Myers just like you can't reason with the Terminator. So, yeah. I don't know. You might have started to convince me that it is a horror movie with sci-fi elements.
And yeah, I don't think I would have thought that until you started down your argument. So yeah, but I think that I'm gonna stand behind that now. But I don't know. I don't want to jump too far ahead, but I'm really anxious to talk about Terminator 2 a little bit, just because we've talked about the boogeyman and how he's lumped in the same grouping as Jason and Michael Myers and, all those big bad boogeymen of horror films. But something really interesting happens in Terminator 2 Judgment Day. And this is one of these, I read an article that was talking about how James Cameron, he's not only like a really great storyteller, and he's a really great director, and he's so good at putting visuals on a screen and just making visually pleasing movies. But that one of the things James Cameron is really, really the king of is making the perfect sequel. And I think Terminator 2 is kind of an example of that, because most of the time sequels, they're known for being not as great as the first one, right? Like, I'll just go ahead and say I have not seen the second Deadpool right now. I just have not gotten to see it yet, and I want to, and it's on my list. But I've heard a lot of people say, oh, it was great. Just, the first one was just a teensy tiny bit better.
I would actually debate them on that, 'cause I loved Deadpool 2.
That's what I said. I'm going to put a disclaimer that says I have not actually seen Deadpool 2, so I can't make my own judgment. But I thought, that's what I've come to expect from sequels, is that if it's a movie that I love and they make a sequel, that I'm going to enjoy it and I'm going to love it, but I'm probably always going to love the first one just a little bit more. Now, there are movies that I would, say the second one or even the third one is my favorite. But Terminator 2, I love that movie a lot more than I liked the first one.
I wish I could just even jokingly disagree with you, but no, I love Terminator 2. My love for Terminator 2 far surpasses Terminator. And part of that has got to be, for me at least, just that movie and when it came out and the age I was when I saw it and all of those sorts of things, because let's be honest here, it came out in 1991. I won't tell you exactly how old I was, but I will say this: it was the first R-rated movie that I saw with my parents' permission. Mom, Dad, sorry, but I may have seen an R-rated movie or two before this that you may just now be finding out about. But that was the first one that I saw in the theater. I begged and begged and begged and begged, and my dad finally broke down and took me to it. And so I loved it. It's my first R-rated movie, but also, I've gone back and watched this movie, I can't tell you how many times, and so much about it holds up still. There's some very dated things, like the Guns N' Roses soundtrack and things like that, but just as a movie in general, like you said, it's a hell of a sequel. It's just, it took everything about Terminator and just amped it up a little bit more and made it even more fun. And you just can't. I think that was my problem with Terminator 3 when I saw it, because story-wise, yes, James Cameron wasn't involved in it, and there were other issues, but story-wise, it was okay. But you could not top that villain, the T-1000, as that liquid metal, able to take on the look of other people that he comes in physical contact with. You just couldn't top that. It's just so original and scary, even because of how not only do you have the mimicking of voices like you brought up earlier, but you've got the mimicking of an entire physical look. He keeps coming back to the Robert Patrick look because we've got to have a stable point of reference, but when you've got a villain that's a relentless killing machine stalking you that can look like anybody, that just takes things up even further in terms of the just stress levels, I guess, because he could be anything. He could be the plant in the room in the corner of the room,
And that's how you get the Day of the Triffids.
Pretty much.
No, you're absolutely right. And, you're kind of solidifying our argument that these are horror movies at their core, because essentially what you have in this movie is a shapeshifter movie. That is what is terrifying about, as you said, the T-1000. So just to kind of back up a little bit and give, Arnold Schwarzenegger in the first one was a T-800 model. And so he was like a lesser Terminator, I guess, even though he was terrifying. But then it's like you have the big bad, and then the bigger bad comes, played by Robert Patrick, who is more advanced, and so he can shapeshift. And so, yeah, oh man, I actually heard that they wanted Billy Idol to play that part. And my first reaction when I heard that was like, oh, that would have been awesome. And then I was like, oh no, I can't imagine it without Robert Patrick. I can't now imagine anybody else as that, because just his face alone is enough to terrify me now.
Well, not just that, but like, I think Billy Idol probably would have done a pretty good job. I mean, no disputing that. I think he could have done a pretty good job, especially with good direction. But there are these moments that Robert Patrick has in that movie where I call it the T-1000 look, where he tilts his head down and lifts his eyes up a little bit, and he just has this I am unstoppable look, and it's just
Yeah.
it's you know exactly the look I'm talking about, you know? Like anybody who's seen the movie and you say that to them, that T-1000 look, they're like, I know what you're talking about, because it's iconic.
Well, it is. I mean, first of all, just the shape of his face is so like angular anyway, and so you can almost see like a metal structure underneath it, like what it would look like. But yeah, the eyes. Oh, he's so good at just giving a look. I'm gonna start using that now.
Well, and
T-1000. I like it.
I'd even say it's a credit to him as an actor. The way there's a scene early on in Terminator 2 where he looks like himself, the actual actor Robert Patrick, as the cop who goes to John Connor's house and is talking to the foster parents, and he's talking to them, and he sounds like he's got like, I'm just looking for John. I've got this empathy, you know, like I sound human, and then as soon as they say, well, he's not here, you can see him change from that, like, oh, I'm here, I'm just looking for him, to I am cold and I don't care anymore and I'm going to find John Connor. And it's just like the way that he does those little subtle looks is just, I mean, it's right up there with like Christopher Reeve, the way he played Clark Kent in Superman by like slumping over and then standing up straight, like just little stuff like that. It's just, you know, it shows what a good actor he really is, and how kind of underrated I think his performance gets just because of so many other great things in that movie.
Oh yeah, it you're right. I mean, and I think that's one of the things that makes it such a good sequel, is that the acting is there, but then the storytelling is there too. Because, and this is one of the things that we can kind of talk about, because Arnold Schwarzenegger becomes the ally in this movie. Yeah, what's really interesting about the plot of this movie is that Arnold Schwarzenegger's Terminator comes back. So you have now the really scary Terminator, and then you have the scary Terminator from the first one who comes back. And what is really interesting is, I guess he's sent back having been programmed through the resistance. I guess that's the best way to describe it. Because now he's there to help protect Sarah Connor and her son, who now has been born and is played by Edward Furlong, which kind of jumping off track here, but you mentioned being at the right age for this movie, and I think that's part of one of the reasons I love this so much, is I had an epic crush on him when this movie came out. I feel like we were right around maybe the same age. Anyway, but yeah, so you have Arnold Schwarzenegger, who's there to now keep John Connor safe, in the same way that the soldier was sent back to keep his mother safe in the first one, which is a really interesting, I think, switch, because you have essentially the villain. I mean, I know it's like a different robot basically, but same actor. But you have the villain of the first film becoming kind of the hero, or at least the ally of the second film. And I keep trying to imagine now, having established that in the first film he fits with like Jason Voorhees, for instance. And I know Jason Voorhees he's kind of a sequel villain, because he wasn't really in the first, I guess. Maybe Michael Myers. We'll say Michael Myers. If you had Michael Myers in Halloween 2 suddenly fighting off a bigger, badder Michael Myers to save his sister, that's kind of on the scale we're talking about, which sounds like it could go really wrong, but somehow works nicely.
Yeah, absolutely. And they justify it in the script. I don't remember exactly how, but like that. Oh no, wait, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead. I'm thinking of Terminator 3, of the Schwarzenegger robot sent back in Terminator 3. So never mind. But yeah, he is, like you said, he's the a different version of a T8. I mean, it's not the same T800 that went back to 1984. It's a different one, but of course they all look the same kind of thing. And, there's so many ways that they could have done a Terminator 2. They could have just had the T-1000 and not had Arnold Schwarzenegger in it at all. Obviously, they wanted him because by 91, his name was enough alone to sell an action movie. But I think it was just so great that they used him in such a different role because it leads to such great moments. And I'm thinking in particular when they go to the mental asylum to break Sarah Connor out, where she's been pretty much since giving birth to John Connor, and she sees him. Like the elevator doors open, and because she's already escaped on her own, and the elevator door opens, and Arnold Schwarzenegger steps out, and it kind of goes slow-mo for a second because she like freaks out and almost has like a panic attack on screen because this is the thing that tried to kill her, however many years ago, and it's back. And she completely does not trust him pretty much for most of the rest of the movie. I mean, gradually she kind of has like grudging trust for the Schwarzenegger robot, but it takes a lot, and I think that's just brilliant. I mean, it's great storytelling to have her have to come to terms with this is not the thing trying to kill her, but she still doesn't trust it because it's a robot from the future, and it could be poisoned or a sleeper agent or something like that. So.
Yeah, absolutely. That is such an interesting thing because most sequels, and if this maybe were going to be a traditional horror franchise, you would have the bad guy and you would have the final girl from the first film meet up somehow in the second film and have to fight it off. And she is having that moment, but it's happening in her head because she doesn't know what's going to happen at this point. And I love that because it kind of brings up all this trauma from the first film in a really nice way, I think. And it also brings up some of the really interesting issues that we've discussed when we were talking about our robots in the main series from this past season. A lot of what we were talking about is our fear of robots becoming self-aware. Like that's always the fear of people, right, when they come around these robots, especially the ones that look too human. It's okay to have a robot vacuuming our floor as long as it doesn't look like a human vacuuming our floor. A little round disc is fine, but the ones that look human are the ones we're worried about. It's too close to us, but not quite there. It's that the uncanny valley of it all. And I think that's so interesting because she doesn't know what its agenda is. And kind of like a real person, you can never really know what their agenda is until, you don't know what they're hiding from you. She knows what it's telling her and she can see a few actions, but she doesn't know, okay, can I fully trust you knowing what happened to me all those years ago? And I think, that's smart storytelling because the easy way would have been, well, just put them together in another film and have them fight each other again. Except this time she has a son, who's born now and not just a hypothetical son in the future. Yeah, I like that choice so much better.
And while we're on the subject, can we just talk about the arc of Sarah Connor as well, just in general? Because I mean, the Sarah Connor in The Terminator is, I mean, she's just a naive girl living with roommates who goes out, like I believe the Terminator catches up with her in a bar. I mean, she's just a normal person in their 20s, right? Like just still young, still going out, still having a good time. The Sarah Connor of Terminator 2 is a fighting machine from hell, if I could put it just anyway. And of course she is, because that's part of the thing. Like she lost custody of John Connor because she was busy trying to prepare him to be the leader of this resistance. And of course, nobody believed her. They thought she was a paranoid schizophrenic, and that's why she's locked up in the mental institution. But of course, I mean, it just makes so much sense that this person, knowing what she knows, would do exactly what they have her do in Terminator 2. I mean, where they go after they rescue her from the mental institution is to some connections that she used to have, who basically have a giant pit full of guns and weapons and stuff, like former friends that are able to help them out with an arsenal, essentially. And so, like, and she is just as capable of using it as the Terminator. So, I mean, I
Which,
like. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
oh no, this is my one little nitpicky thing. Is yes, you're right. I love how she turns into this like killer kick-ass soldier by the second one, because you're right, she's so just an everyday girl in her 20s in the first one, and so she spends a lot of the first one running and relying on Kyle Reese to help her out, right? But if we look at it this way, everything, like, she became who she is in the second one because of what happened in the first one, right? So Skynet sending back, I guess, the Terminator to kill her before she can have her son turns her into the crazy soldier woman who then prepares her son to lead the resistance. And if they had just left well enough alone, then her son wouldn't have led the resistance.
Well, I mean, it could be a butterfly effect thing, or it could be a closed loop, because, you know, the whole thing that we find out at the end of the Terminator, which we haven't talked about yet, is that Kyle Reese is actually John Connor's father. I mean, they're like brothers.
Right.
They're brothers in arms fighting in the future in the Resistance, but John Connor knows all along. It's let known later that Kyle Reese was his dad, so he specifically chose Kyle Reese for this mission, knowing what would happen. And, you know, so I mean,
this is why I hate time travel movies. I'll just put that out there. Like, I love these movies, but I hate time travel movies.
I mean, I like the headache that they pose, but I do get frustrated by it sometimes, because there is, and again, I know we agreed not to talk too much about Terminator 3, but there is a moment in Terminator 3 where John Connor is even older. He's a young adult, probably around the same age Sarah Connor was in the first Terminator movie. So he's not a, you know, middle schooler anymore. He's an actual adult, and he sees the Schwarzenegger robot, and he asks him, you know, I thought we stopped Judgment Day, because that's kind of what they think happened at the end of Terminator 2. And he says, no, Judgment Day is inevitable. And pardon me, I can't say it without the stupid Schwarzenegger accent, but that, I mean, but he says, you know, Judgment Day is inevitable, but essentially you just postponed it. You didn't stop it entirely. And so, I don't know, it does kind of cause that question of, did sending the Terminator back in the first movie create the John Connor that they were trying to stop in the first place, or did it just make that John Connor more badass, so that's why they had to kill him as a kid in the second movie? I don't know. I mean, maybe John Connor would have always led the Resistance, but then the training he got
But no,
from
he wouldn't, because he wouldn't be there, because Kyle Reese would have had no reason to go back in time.
I see what you're doing there. Yes, you do have a point.
So I said I hate time travel movies, but anyway.
Yeah, it's a... So, but, yeah, like, I don't know, going back to just Sarah Connor in general, and I like the arc not just because she becomes a badass, but because it makes sense that she would become a badass. I mean, this is a person who essentially suffered a trauma. You know, she fell in love with a guy, sort of, or at the very least they slept together because they were emotionally wrecked and needed to do something. But regardless, she became a mom and was hunted by a killing machine. It was a very traumatic experience. She was told that her son would grow up to lead this resistance in a post-apocalyptic world. Of course she would do everything she could to prevent that trauma from happening again. I mean, that's what happens with so many people who survive traumas. Their PTSD is that they spend their life trying to prevent that from happening again. So when she sees him stepping out of the elevator, that's why she has her panic attack. But at the same time, all the steps that led her to that moment make perfect sense too. Of course she would surround herself with guns and rocket launchers and everything else, because that would make her feel safe.
Well, and going back to our original argument that this is a horror film series now, she is the final girl, right? She's the final girl from the first film. She's the one who escapes and survives, despite all odds. And what do final girls do if they come back for the sequel? They are stronger. They're nothing like they once were. Perfect example was Halloween. I mean, look at Jamie Lee Curtis's character over all the Halloween movies. She is the perfect example of someone who's like, okay, I've been through this before. I know what we need to do. I know how to play this game. And to me, when you look at Sarah Connor, I mean, she is that character. She's the Laurie Strode character, basically, of the Terminator movies, which now I'm just going to go start telling everybody that Terminator is really a horror movie. Because it just fits so nicely everywhere.
Or it at least definitely uses those horror movie tropes so well.
It does, yeah. Which may be kind of like when we were talking about Jaws in one of our other summer episodes, talking about how Jaws crisscrosses genre boundaries so often, and that's what made it successful in many ways. And I think the same could be said about the Terminator and Terminator 2 Judgment Day, is that it doesn't stick to the rules of just one genre. It's not just a time travel movie or a sci-fi movie or a movie with robots, or an apocalyptic movie. It's or a horror movie. It's going to borrow tropes from all of them, and I think that's what keeps it fresh and unique.
No, I definitely agree with you on that, and especially with just the genre hopping. I mean, yeah, I don't know that I have anything that I could add that says it better than that, because I mean, you've hit the nail on the head with what it's doing. Is it's borrowing a little bit from all of these things, and using Sarah Connor as the final girl. I mean, I don't want to put words into James Cameron's mouth, because he may not have been thinking that consciously, but it certainly feels that way. That, I mean, it feels like they're borrowing from these horror tropes, and so I don't know. Yeah, maybe Terminator 2 might be one of my favorite horror movies now. I'm going to definitely get some raised eyebrows if I say that to people, because, and I'll just direct them to this podcast and say, go listen to my podcast, guys, because it's all laid out there. I don't want to have to rehash this argument.
That's right. Well, I also kind of want to talk about, because this is one of the places that it does kind of veer off from at least the tropes of the horror film, and kind of makes it a bit more personal. And we've talked about the arc of Sarah Connor and kind of what she goes through over these two movies, and it's a really interesting arc. But then I think if you look at the T-800 character, the original Terminator, if you want to call him that, Arnold Schwarzenegger's character, and what he kind of goes through basically as artificial, if you look at him as something possessing artificial intelligence. And I think the question when you think about artificial intelligence is, what is it? Is it just the ability to gain information and kind of put that back in a realistic way? That's not real human intelligence, because that's kind of like when you take these bots and feed them like Harry Potter books, and then they spit back a Harry Potter book at you. It sounds like a Harry Potter book, but it's really not. Those are on the internet, by the way, and you should look that up. But what makes real intelligence, I think, different from artificial intelligence is the emotional quotient to it, the ability to feel and to process emotions. And that's what makes, I think, AI closer to being human, and we kind of get that a little bit with this T-800, at least in the Terminator 2 movie, because in the first one, as we said, he's just a killing machine. I mean, he's essentially a psychopath. He has no emotion whatsoever. Certainly the T-1000 is the same way, but you have something a little bit different with this T-800, and how he grows in, I guess, emotional maturity over the course of the movie.
Yeah, I would definitely say he does, and I think it's because he's been given this directive of guarding John Connor, and of course his interactions with John Connor are what lead to those sort of growth, like starting with John Connor saying you can't kill anybody anymore. Like that's one of the rules. And at least a very, very funny moment when they're breaking his mother out, where he shoots a guy. I think he's blocking the entrance or whatever, and John Connor looks at him and he says he'll live. It's and so, but I think that's another smart storytelling moment there, where like because this robot, this AI, this cyborg, whatever you want to call it, is not just being sent back to the past with one directive, which is to find and kill someone. It's actually being forced to protect someone, and in doing so have prolonged interactions and those sorts of things. Like John Connor starts to rub off on him a little bit, and there's a scene where I don't remember if it's Sarah Connor writing a letter or if it's just a voiceover, where she basically says like seeing the two of them together is really weird because she knows that the Terminator won't hurt John, but it's really like uncomfortable for her to watch, or something to that effect. And yeah, I think it's all because of the prolonged exposure to one another, wherein John is the one calling the shots. Like the Terminator is programmed to follow his explicit orders, and so he begins to essentially take on aspects of his personality too.
Yeah, now I'm just thinking about it, because I guess I hadn't thought about it I knew through the eyes of Sarah Connor that she would be terrified seeing the Terminator. But then thinking about, now you see this thing that tried so hard to kill you, now protecting your son must be just a whole other level of terror, because she's not only trusting it not to harm her, but essentially putting her son's life in his hands, and that must have been terrifying. But then, it is kind of funny, because he essentially begins the movie as like, he being T-800, starts the movie being like this killing machine with no emotion, but now he's sent back, as you said, to protect. So he becomes this like toddler, like he has the emotional maturity of a toddler, but can kill. Like, I'm just imagining that, because having to be told no, you can't kill. Kind of like I remember telling my boys when they were like 2 years old, like, no, you can't just bite somebody because you're angry. You can't just hit because you're frustrated. No, you can't kill somebody just to make it easier for you in your mission. You can't just take somebody out. Like, that's taking a life, and having to teach that. And it all kind of leads up to the climax, which is, I think the final scenes are like probably, right up there with the reasons why I love Terminator 2 so much. Not just that they flipped the kind of bad robot, good robot thing, and the villain becomes the hero, but those last scenes that we see with the T-800 are so interesting to me. And for those of you who haven't seen it, and again, I'm not going to put spoilers on something that came out in 1991, so sorry. But basically, the Terminator after they deal with T-1000 in a very like summer blockbustery way, there's lots of big shoot-ups and stuff. It's what you would expect, right? I think there's a grenade launcher at one point. But anyway, you have T-800, so Arnold Schwarzenegger's character, and he knows that he's been sent there to protect, and he's been, as you said, been taking on like aspects of John's personality and been getting to know him and almost kind of loving him in a weird way, for a robot. But he basically says, like, I can't take the chance that somebody might reprogram me and use me in the way that T-1000 is being used. Like, I can't go back to being that. And I can't take that chance, and I can't kill myself either.
Well, and it wasn't just that. It was actually, if you remember, going back to the time travel headache that we were talking about, part of the part of the plot line is in the second half of the movie is that they go and find this guy Miles Dyson, the guy who eventually he owns Cyberdyne Labs, and he ends up creating Skynet based on the hand that was left from the original Terminator in the first movie. So he has taken that hand and used it to reverse engineer this future technology, and so they steal that
Right.
and they destroy it. And so the Terminator, Arnold Schwarzenegger, even says, like, you know, as long as I'm alive, there's still this future technology. Judgment Day could still happen because of my technology getting reverse engineered, so
Right.
therefore I've got to go.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he basically he knows what he can be used to do.
Yeah.
Right. He realizes that, and that's that kind of when you talk about robots becoming self-aware, like sometimes we just kind of assume like when people say, "Oh no, the robots are becoming self-aware," that's like shorthand for saying there's going to be an uprising and they're going to rebel against us, right? But really, you see the horror of a robot becoming self-aware in this moment. And this is what makes it such a smart, like, science fiction robot story. Because he recognizes in this point, like you said, the danger that he poses and the immense responsibility he has because of that. So I don't even know some people who can become that self-aware to recognize, like, oh my gosh, I'm capable of so much destruction. And that's basically where he is. And yes, he connects it to, of course, Sarah and John, but he also, like you said, connects it to the greater Skynet and what is coming down the road and what he's afraid will happen if he's still around. And so there's this very heartbreaking scene where he basically has to have Sarah kill him or destroy him, right? And it's sad. I think it's sad, you know.
Oh,
It's
absolutely.
a sad film.
Especially with the
There's just
thumbs
ending
up at
for it.
the end. Oh,
Yes.
gets me every time.
But
Of
yeah,
course, part of me wonders how he was able to make the thumbs up because his processing unit is in his head. But whatever, let's look beyond that. It's still
well, you
sad.
know. maybe he knew at the end that he was like, okay, I'm about to lose my ability, so he quickly that was very well planned on his part, I guess. But yeah, I just the idea of being able to think about not only who he is, but what his place is in the world and what it could be in the world, and being able to value lives outside of himself, that I think shows his humanity and kind of shows what he's learned over the course of this movie, at least. So it's really an interesting arc, I think, that he goes from being this kind of toddler that's capable of great destruction to really a higher life form than probably a lot of humans I know.
Well, it looks like we're starting to kind of run out of our self-imposed time limit here, so that's probably just a great place to wrap things up, seeing as how we've kind of reached the end of Terminator 2. Did you have any final thoughts on the Terminator films?
I do not. I will say that having gone back and revisited them for this episode, I remembered how much I liked them, and I recommend people go back and rewatch if you haven't done so in a long time. And now I'm really excited for the reboot.
Absolutely. And I'll say this as far as Terminator 2 goes, because it was hailed in 91 as just this groundbreaking special effects thing, because they did so much with special effects and the way they worked practical effects in with the computer effects and all of that. I mean, it was just groundbreaking. And, I mean, so much of the special effects still hold up today, and it's been almost 30 years since that movie came out. I mean, that's what kills me, is just how well it still holds up. I do, before we end, though, I have to give a shout out. I mean, you talk about these catchphrases and, the I'll be backs and the hasta la vista babies. I could not talk about Terminator without throwing this out. That I'm a gamer. I play some games online with certain friends of mine, and There's a wonderful game called Heroes of the Storm made by Blizzard that when we're feeling like we just want a game together, but we want it low key. Instead of playing against a team of real players, we'll play against a team of AI. It's 5-on-5 kind of thing, and the AI set at its highest difficulty is capable of doing things that no human could, like seeing characters that are supposed to be invisible and knowing right exactly where you're going to be when they shouldn't. And so we have taken to calling that AI Skynet because it knows things that it shouldn't. And so we would not be able to make our constant Skynet jokes if it were not for these movies. So just want to throw that out there for my several friends that will get that one little joke. So, and those of you, if you ever play against incredibly hard AI in any sort of game, just call it Skynet and leave it be, because Skynet knows, and Skynet will kill you all. So, yeah, Terminators, man. Great movies.
Terminators.
Great movies.
Let me say one thing real quick. In the future, for future Terminator movies, let's find a better way to describe a lady Terminator than Terminatrix.
True.
I'll just throw that out there. Just if anybody's listening, that's what I would like.
Well, I guess that's a perfect place for us to end this episode then. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll be back in 2 more weeks as we continue on with this summer of sci-fi. So we will see you then.